Dean Rusk disagrees with you, and he was the Secretary of State at the time, but that's fine.
The communist nations have exploited the turmoil of a time of transition in an effort to extend communist control into other areas of the world.
Thoughts on Dean Rusk and America's involvement in Vietnam? I know next to nothing about that.
Exactly. We are told that Manafort had this dealing with this evil Kilimnik, the Russian spy. But was in fact Kilimnik a Russian spy? What evidence is there that Kilimnik was a Russian spy? For some time prior to the 2016 U.S. presidential election, claims of deep and cohering clandestine ties between Donald Trump, his campaign team, and the Russian state abounded. They've only risen in volume in the years since. Central to the allegations was the close, long-running relationship between Trump's campaign manager, Paul Manafort, and the former Ukrainian President Viktor Yanukovych. At the time of his violent removal from office in February 2014, Manafort had been advising him on political strategy for almost 10 years, and his assistant, Konstantin Kilimnik's ongoing work on his behalf in the country. Ever since, Kilimnik has been almost universally presented in the mainstream media as a Russian spy. Anonymous sources told a number of outlets prior to the election he was known among Moscow political operatives as Kyosta, the guy from the GRU, and a living indication, if not proof, of a sinister, spectacular relationship between the president and the Kremlin. Such claims were seemingly vindicated by Special Counsel Robert Mueller's Trump-Russia investigation, having indicted Kilimnik on the 8th of June 2018 for obstruction of justice and conspiracy to obstruct justice. The Probe's final report repeatedly referred to him as tied to Russian intelligence. However, bombshell internal FBI and State Department documents reveal that Kilimnik was in fact a sensitive intelligence source for Washington, from 2013 at least. While still employed by Manafort's firm, he would meet with high-ranking staff at the embassy in Kiev, sometimes several times a week, to covertly relay insider information on the Ukrainian government, regularly submit lengthy reports for U.S. officials, and deliver back-channel messages to Ukrainian leaders in return. In one memo, Alan Purcell, chief political officer at the embassy 2014 to 2017, told investigators State Department officials deemed Kilimnik to be of such value they undertook an unusual level of discretion to protect him. For instance, his name was kept out of cables lest he and his covert role be compromised by leaks. Purcell also said Kilimnik provided detailed information on the internal workings of the opposition bloc, some of which was also valuable. It was so valuable, it was forwarded immediately to the ambassador. Alexander Kasanoff, Purcell's predecessor, described Kasanoff to agents, one of the only people inside the Yanukovych government who was willing to talk to the embassy, and a highly reliable informant, providing insider insight into the inner workings of the administration. He was also said to be significantly less slanted than most sources of information in Ukraine, which appears to be a euphemism for critical of Russia. The pair would meet at least bi-weekly and occasionally multiple times in the same week outside the embassy to avoid detection. Kilimnik allowed to take the lead on his operational security for their meetups. He enthusiastically provided real-time intelligence on all manners of issues, including who was in and out of favor in the government. State officials, moreover, told the FBI that while Kilimnik had Ukrainian-Russian residences, he had no apparent allegiance to Moscow and was flabbergasted by the Crimean reunification. Such was the bond between Kilimnik and his handlers. He was permitted to visit the U.S. twice in 2016 to meet with State Department officials. Three sources with direct knowledge of the inner workings of the Mueller probe have confirmed the special counsel's team possessed all these memos and more, not only long before the probe concluded, but prior to Kilimnik being charged with attempted obstruction of the probe. This naturally raises yet further concerns about the credibility of the Mueller report. It's difficult to see, for instance, how the FBI addressed Kilimnik to have ties to Russian intelligence, given what their sources relayed to them. Also, that he was allowed to visit the U.S., apparently unmolested, is a clear indication he wasn't listed in visa databases as a potential foreign intelligence agent. Furthermore, the emails indicate Kilimnik delivered a plan for resolving the then 2-year conflict in eastern Ukraine in May 2016 to the Barack Obama administration on one of his State Department-sanctioned visits to Washington. Over the course of the trip, he would meet Kasanoff, who by then occupied a top policy position at the department, for dinner. The day after, Kilimnik emailed his former handler's official email address recounting the plan they discussed over the meal. The missive set out 8 bullet points, starting with a ceasefire, economic recovery zones to build the war-torn Ukraine regions, and a decree of amnesty for people involved in the conflict. Kilimnik also provided yet further intel on the political situation in Ukraine, among other things noting Yanukovych's party of regions cannot be reincarnated, and calling a local politician who wished to relaunch the movement as stupid. In response, Kasanoff thanked Kilimnik for the proposal and said he'd passed the email to his superiors, which may have included Victoria Nuland, President Obama's Assistant Secretary of State for European and Eurasian Affairs, who were chewing it over. This meeting and the resultant correspondence weren't mentioned in the report, but Kilimnik's August 2016 delivery of the same plan to Manafort in Trump Tower, New York, is, and indeed was, flagged as potentially villainous. There can surely be no ampler indication of the politically motivated nature of the special counsel's probe. After all, the allegations Manafort had secret ties with the Russian state, with Kilimnik being just one example, was a key catalyst behind the investigation's very launch. Such suggestions were resoundingly rebutted over the course of the probe when internal documents and the sworn testimony of several witnesses made clear Manafort's purpose in Ukraine was to push President Yanukovych towards a West-leaning platform. On the auspices of Engage Ukraine, Manafort sought to encourage EU integration with Ukraine so the country wouldn't fall to Russia, and reinforced key geopolitical messaging of how Europe and the US should not risk losing Ukraine to Russia. And after the strategy was underway, Manafort stressed in private emails to colleagues, including Kilimnik, the importance of highlighting the constant actions taken by the Yanukovych government to comply with Western demands, and the changes made to comply with the EU Association Agreement, which Moscow and many in the country opposed. These disclosures were largely ignored by the mainstream media at the time, perhaps predictably, given the overwhelmingly majority of journalists were fully ensconced in Russiagate hysteria. As the 10th of June, these shock articles had likewise gone unreported elsewhere. As with so many things Trump-Russia, these illuminating documents offer more questions than answers. For instance, what exactly were Manafort and Kilimnik really doing in Ukraine? To say the least, the revelations cast a very different light on the news reports of his activities in Ukraine. For example, in August 2016, Politico published a lengthy article on Kilimnik, noting he continued to advise the opposition bloc, even after the party stopped paying Manafort's firm, leaving it unable to pay some of its employees and rent. While the piece's strong implication is this enduring consultancy represented a potentially sinister connection between Trump's then campaign chair and the Russian state. Based on the contents of the FBI memos, it now seems far more likely that Kilimnik didn't step away in order to continue providing intelligence to Washington. Whatever the truth of the matter, Kilimnik undeniably represents yet another individual in the campaign's wider milieu with ties to Western intelligence, who proved very useful indeed to those seeking to perpetrate the notion of collusion between the presidential candidate and the Kremlin. Joseph Mifsud, who seems to have literally vanished into thin air, is another. One can only wonder whether Mueller likewise suppressed inconvenient facts about the mysterious Maltese academic. If so, why? And who benefits from such an omission? And there's the story of Konstantin Kilimnik, the man who was giving his life for Ukraine, the man who was working with the State Department, giving them information to save the country that he loved, being smeared as a Russian agent with ties to Russia. This is the great Robert Mueller, who knew all this and kept it out of the report. So you can point to the report on page 6 all you want about Konstantin Kilimnik. It is incorrect.